either one have any relevant financial interest to acknowledge?
Nope.
They're probably sorry that that's the case.
A little louder, Ryan.
So I want to introduce Jake Wright. He's a detective with Watertown Police Department and currently with the Jefferson County Drug Task Force. And Margot is Gray, who is also Detective Sergeant with the Jefferson County Task Force. And they're going to be talking to us about what they see on the streets today and any other information they give us.
Sure. All right. Thank you guys for all coming and listening to us this morning. As you heard, I'm Detective Sergeant Gray. I'm in Jefferson County Sheriff's Office employee, and I'm in charge currently of the Jefferson County Drug Task Force. The Jefferson County Drug Task Force is a multi-jurisdictional agency. What that means is that we have officers from various agencies throughout Jefferson County that work as a unit. Currently, every law enforcement agency in Jefferson County is a member of the Drug Task Force. So they contribute to the task force by either A, providing us a stellar officer, such as Jake Wright's, or they provide us hours so that we can employ part-time deputies to fill their obligations. So that's one of the ways that they contribute. Another way they contribute is they help finance the unit by providing us with some money that we can use for control buys out on the streets where we're buying out from the dealers. Or for equipment purposes and things like that. So, as you can see, everybody's a member. We meet quarterly. I meet with all the chiefs. Poor little me with the chiefs, and they ask me what's going on and why I did this and why I did that. But it's a great unit, and all we do is we focus 100% on drug work. So if we're buying drugs out on the streets, or if we're developing search warrants to go search houses for drugs, surveillance, we're developing informants, we're, you name it, we do it, as long as it relates to drug work. Task force responsibilities, we're investigating felony drug cases for the most part. By doing, like I said, the control buys, and if you don't know what a control buy is, it means that we either ourselves or we develop what's called an informant who has some charge that they want to work off. We'll go out to the dealers and actually buy the drugs. We're buying anything from pills, which you guys are very familiar with, to marijuana, to heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, Molly, you name it, we can buy it on the street, and it is around here. The biggest thing that we are concerned with at this point for our safety and the community's safety, all drugs, but the biggest thing that we worry about is the fentanyl, and we'll probably touch on that a little bit more as we go. Search warrants, we execute our own search warrants. If it's a high-risk search warrant, we'll ask for the SWAT team to come out and execute it for us. A lot of work goes into search warrants. We have to find the background on the individual that we're targeting. We have to find the background on the individuals that reside in that residence. Are there guns? Are there dogs? Are there past violent tendencies from this individual? Just a couple days ago we did a search warrant, high risk. We used the Watertown entry team. We asked for a no-knock search warrant. It was granted by the judge, feeling that there was enough risk for us as officers that we needed to not knock. Getting in, we came out with 7 guns. 1 was stolen from another agency's jurisdiction. 2 pit bulls in there. 1 was very aggressive. I'm glad to say that all of us came out in one piece, and everybody else came out in one piece. So it was a successful search warrant. CEASE is another thing that we focus on, cannabis enforcement and suppression effort. We eradicate wild marijuana, not as much anymore.
It's definitely gone on the wayside since the state started legalizing recreational marijuana, so not as much funding for that program as there used to be.
Yeah, and the other states have impacted us in that sense. Outdoor cultivated marijuana grows, where people are actually outside growing them and they come out and tend to them. Indoor cultivated marijuana grows, we're investigating those as well. types of street drugs. I will let you start from here.
Yeah. So I'm Jake Reitz. Now you guys know that. The goal of this presentation is just to kind of give you an idea as to what each drug looks like, maybe some packaging, and what we're seeing happening in the streets as far as like more recently goes. I'm sure some of you have at least seen the marijuana plant or the buds of the marijuana plant. So it's the most common drug that we see, or people that want to report, drug activity in their neighborhood. Typically, it's going to be a marijuana dealer because that's the most commonly abused drug, and that's the most commonly traded drug as well. So this is just an illustration of what it looks like. More importantly, is it's usually smoked, but now it can be liquidized into dabs. It's this new thing that's kind of hit our area specifically, with people using butane fuel. I'll get right into that. It's a high concentrate THC, which is, I'm sure a lot of you know, is tetrahydrocannabinol, the active ingredient in marijuana. They're extracting the actual THC from the plant, and then they can then smoke the liquid, which results in a much higher high, I suppose is the best way to say it.
The regular marijuana plant is anywhere from 10 to 25% THC content. When they're extracting the THC from the plant itself, we're now up to anywhere from 75 to 90% THC content. So, and it takes very little of the concentrate to get a high.
Right, so this is how the process works. I don't want to be in the way, but there's your little beaker here. You fill this with marijuana plants that are ground up, marijuana buds that are ground up. You put the butane fuel on top here, and you spray it down. There's a little hole at the bottom here that's usually drilled out or cut out. And then when they put the butane fuel in there, it extracts the THC, and then they put it into little containers like this. So if you ever see little silicone circular containers, like, oh, you can't see it, like that, most likely there's going to be high concentrated THC in there. And then we briefly went over like indoor marijuana grows. They're becoming less and less now that recreational marijuana has hit other states. So we're seeing a lot of it get shipped in as opposed to people growing it themselves. Usually I say if somebody's growing it themselves, they don't know what the heck they're doing. But this is just some common signs that you're going to see at an indoor marijuana grow. The windows will be covered, sweating from the inside. We'll have vents from buildings. They'll have exposed wires running to different buildings if they're out on a farm or out in the county. You'll notice that like a light's always on in one room, and it's kind of weird because nobody ever leaves, that high-powered light on 24/7 because it's probably pretty expensive. But that's usually what you see if you see an indoor marijuana grow. Like I said, it's not happening as near as often as it used to. I think we investigated about 3 or 4 of them in the past year, without actually seizing any plants. It was just, they reported it and we investigated it.
The amount of plants we used to seize in the past from indoor grows was much greater because, like Jake said, dopers are lazy. They don't want to put in all that extra effort, so they found that if they can order marijuana from Colorado or California, they can get it delivered to them through the U.S. mail.
Yeah, and that's what we're really investigating now, is we're doing a lot of mail fraud or mail covers, and we're working with the postal inspectors at USPS or UPS allows us to go in there with our K9 units and snip packages, because that's really what the game has changed to, as opposed to people actually growing this stuff. It is still out there. There are still people growing their own marijuana, but what we've come to find out is people are just getting it shipped right to their house, and they don't have to do any of the hard work or labor. Does anyone have questions on marijuana right now? More than one, because I'm going to go into different drugs, so if you have a question now. Go ahead.
So we had a company call up and say they don't want marijuana tested on their pre-employment drug screens any longer. They don't care whether their workers use marijuana or not. Is that a sentiment you're seeing out in the community that people?
It depends on the job, I suppose. I mean, like I know in law enforcement in Colorado, they don't want any of their law enforcement officers testing positive for THC at all.
Well, so they don't want the person tested. they're having trouble hiring people because so many people test positive for marijuana. They just want to eliminate that part of the drug screen.
And that is a big issue in the legalized states, is that they are finding that they're having difficulties hiring people for jobs that require them to be clean. Because it is legal, people don't realize that they still are unemployable because they have it in their system. There are jobs out there. I mean, you don't want a crane operator, a forklift operator, a surgeon, you know, under the influence of THC. So they are having some of those issues with employment in those states. Now, if an employer doesn't want to test somebody, you know, it's the employer's decision whether or not they want to do those tests, but hopefully they never have anything happen where they could end up in a lawsuit and then all of a sudden, you know, there's a blood test done. Because I know if it's a criminal act and we come in, we may ask for blood testing to be done. And if that comes out later on.
And historically, it's never been a crime to actually have consumed the drug. It's actually possessing it itself. So if you go into the hospital and you're found with, you know, marijuana in your system, it's not charged. Well, you smoke marijuana. I mean, there's not much that we can do about it. So it's not really a crime to consume it. It's just more so actually possessing it itself.
It may be more of a civil issue at some point.
Any other questions? All right, we're going to move on to cocaine. So 35% of the world's cocaine, well, the cocaine leaf is actually grown in Colombia. I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of movies, or at least I have, about how cocaine came to be in America. But what we're seeing is about 2/3 of our cocaine is coming right across the Mexican border into the U.S. Via cartels and other drug traffickers that they have. But majority of our cocaine is coming from Central America because it's so profitable. The way cocaine is made, there's cocaine leaves, they're harvested, they're spread out on a big, massive tarp and they dry out. And then once they're dried, they're put into a big pit of chemicals, and that starts extracting the cocaine alkaloid. Kind of similar to the way the marijuana high concentrate THC works. They're using chemicals to extract their actual drug itself. And then it's transported in the form of powdered cocaine that we see in the movies or that you've ever seen in real life. And then that is then shipped over via vehicle or ship or airplane into the U.S. across the border. It's usually snorted. We're starting to see a lot more people inject cocaine, which is kind of rare. At least I thought up until about a year ago, but then I started getting reports of a lot of people starting to inject their cocaine, which I don't understand. I mean, the high that you get from snorting it is near immediate, as opposed, I mean, it's going to be faster if you inject it, but I've never understood it. And people that have tried to explain it to me, it doesn't make sense to me, but they're starting to inject it.
You're not stoned enough to understand.
Right, I guess not.
Whoa.
So this is just some common cocaine illustrations. The big brick that you see, that's the kilo, a kilo of cocaine. This runs about $40,000 to $50,000 worth of cocaine here. We just seized about 3/4 of a kilo up in Dodge County. So I mean, it's in our area, and that person had a ton of people coming from Watertown and Jefferson County area to purchase from him.
To give you a better idea on exactly what a kilo of cocaine would look like, because I mean you don't have any measurements, it's actually about this size. So a half sheet of paper and probably about that thick. So that's a good chunk of cocaine. Those little sandwich baby corners in the hand, that's about the size of a gram of cocaine. And a gram of cocaine on the street would go for anywhere from $80 to $100.
Yep, so we're going to go from every size here. So the kilo you have there, you have the 1 gram baggies, that's going to be your personal use amount, 1 gram. I mean, if people get caught with 3 grams, you know, 3 little baggies like that, they're probably going to get popped for intent to deliver it. And then we see this is right around maybe an ounce to 8 ball amount. An 8 ball is 3.5 grams, so these three plus another half of that would probably equal that. And an 8 ball of cocaine is going for about $250. So they're getting a discount if they buy a ball.
Yeah. Ounce of cocaine is probably about the size of a little bigger than a golf ball, between a golf ball and a tennis ball.
Yeah.
And that's about $1,300 on the street.
Yeah, and then most of the time we see this. We don't see the actual lines, we'll see like residue from people doing lines of cocaine. And like I said, cocaine is normally ingested, inhaling it. Ingest? Why can't I think of the word? Snorting it. God. So yeah, they'll put it out and they'll cut it up into lines, they'll snort the lines, and then usually what we find is like a plate or a mirror, for whatever reason. Sometimes even like Coca-Cola trays, like they like to do it off the Coca-Cola trays, which, good for them. But yeah, that's usually what we're finding. It's extremely hard to find these small, tiny little baggies when you're searching someone. But when you do, usually it's, you find it in their pants and they're saying, it's not my pants, this isn't my shirt, I'm not me, I don't know who this is.
There was a Hyundai logo embossed on the...
Yeah, so we've actually bought cocaine that has a stamp. So these are cartel stamps, what you see on the kilo there, and it kind of identifies where the cocaine came from and what cartel actually processed it and created the cocaine. Sometimes when it comes across the border, there will be other gangs that will stomp on it, and essentially they're cutting up their kilo, adding in like baking soda or cutting agent so they can get more money out of it. And then they stamp it with their own logo. But for the most part, when you see a logo stamped on a kilo, it means that it's going to be your most pure cocaine that you're going to find. So when I first started, I didn't know the difference between crack cocaine and cocaine. I just thought they were totally different drugs. But what I found out was that powdered cocaine is the base for crack cocaine. And the process of creating crack cocaine is dissolving the powdered cocaine that you see that people are snorting into a solution with baking soda and water. They boil it, it creates a solid substance. That solid substance becomes your crack cocaine. They take that out, they let it dry, they can start breaking it up into the little rocks that you see in the picture there. So these are super brown compared to what we would normally see. They're not always super brown like that, but that's just to kind of give you an idea as to what crack cocaine would look like. And the reason they do this is because people want to smoke their crack cocaine, and it's a lot easier to do that than trying to smoke powdered cocaine. But yeah, and it increases the street value. So you're adding baking soda to your mixture, you're getting more money out of your product. So that's why dealers are typically selling crack cocaine as well, because it can maximize their profits.
We, for a while there, it was mostly just powdered cocaine that we were dealing with. And just to back up a little bit, I was a detective in the drug task force from 2001 to 2007, and then I came back as a supervisor starting in 2012. My first stint in here, we did nothing but, I should say that, we bought nothing but marijuana and powdered cocaine. This time around, we're seeing a lot more crack cocaine than I ever saw in my first 5.5 years. So they're transitioning. I mean, we're seeing quite a bit of the powdered cocaine, but we're also seeing a lot of the crack cocaine this time around too.
Yeah, and cocaine's definitely on a comeback. With all the negative talk about heroin, people have to supplement their addiction to something else, which becomes cocaine, crack cocaine, methamphetamine. I'll get into methamphetamine later, but that's kind of what you see. It's swinging back and forth, and right now it's going back to the stimulants.
Back to the 80s.
Yes, back to the 80s, and methamphetamine, so early 2000s. Anyone have questions on cocaine and crack cocaine? If you think of one, at the end of it we'll have questions, but
Explain how they smoke it and what to look for smoking devices.
Right, so smoking devices for crack cocaine, usually you have a metal smoking tube or a glass smoking tube. There's going to be copper scouring pad that they break off and they stuff into this little, I wish I had a picture of it, this little metal tube. They do it in a socket set too, they can use those. And they essentially trap their little rock of cocaine or crack cocaine inside the middle of the tube, and then the chore boy or copper scouring pad that's stuffed in there keeps it nice and still in there so it doesn't move, and they can light it and smoke it that way. I wish I had a picture, but I apologize. If you want to, not on your work computer, just go ahead and Google crack cocaine. All right, moving into heroin. So we've seen an increase, obviously, in heroin. Heroin is derived from the poppy plant. Only specific poppy plants can actually produce or manufacture heroin. I'm not going to get into that stuff because I'm sure you guys are a lot more knowledgeable than I am about how it's formed and derived or its effect on the body, but I will get into some basic stuff that I know about heroin. So what we see with heroin, it's kind of like a gravelly substance, at least the stuff that we're finding. It's going to be brown to tan, kind of a rocky substance. And it changes depending on the processing, but in our area what we see is a lot of the tan and brown substance. We don't see a lot of the China white, which is an old wives' tale because I've never seen it. But apparently they have seen it in the past, but I just haven't.
I've also seen some that actually looks like ash from a fireplace, where it's gray and real fine. I've seen that a couple times now. And I know for a while there, back in 2012, 2013, just looking at the heroin and the way it appeared, I could basically tell you if it came from Rockford, Illinois, from Milwaukee or Madison, because in our county, we're right in the middle of all three of those major cities. And Watertown was running to Milwaukee, Fort Atkinson was running to Rockford, Lake Mills was running to Madison, and they each had a different appearance. Now, because certain dealers have been taken off in those areas, people are scrambling to find their heroin, so now they're going to travel. Watertown goes down to Rockford, Lake Mills goes to Milwaukee. So it's kind of all mixed now, but it was kind of interesting there in the beginning. It was like, okay, this is tan, it's coming from Rockford. This is gray, it's coming from Madison. This has got more of a brown tint, it's coming from Milwaukee. But that has changed.
And then with heroin came fentanyl. So I'm going to get more back into heroin in a second here, but fentanyl has become a major issue for law enforcement, not only like substance abuse wise, but the way we handle it as evidence becomes really problematic. We're having a lot of people that are getting it sent to them via mail, and that becomes a nightmare because you're talking full hazmat responses to some of these places that are getting fentanyl sent to them because the lethal dose is so little. But what we found out after talking to some DEA agents that work down at the border is that the cartels down in Mexico have found out that instead of producing heroin, it's much easier to produce fentanyl. So the heroin, you have to grow the poppy plant, you have to extract it, you have to get farming, and it can only be grown in certain areas of Mexico or Central America. But with fentanyl, it's similar to methamphetamine. So with methamphetamine, you can create it just in a lab. Same thing with fentanyl. It can be created in a lab. All they need is the chemicals, and they can create this stuff. So what they estimated, they said in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see pure fentanyl just coming over the border as opposed to heroin. And it scares the heck out of us because that's something that we're going to have to deal with in the future. And finding it on somebody is, there's been plenty of cops who have overdosed. We've had a cop overdose in Whitewater. This stuff does happen, and it's in our jurisdiction. And now to hear that it's going to be coming straight across the border in kilos, that's scary stuff. But so essentially, the fentanyl is being created in these cartel super labs, similar to the way that in Breaking Bad, I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. It's going to be the same thing with fentanyl. It is going to replace the methamphetamine because it's so profitable. All people have to do is just add a cutting agent to it, and they can sell a kilo of fentanyl for tenfold what they're selling a kilo of heroin for.
The lethal dose there, that actually might be a little bit more than what I've been hearing is, about 4 or 5 grains the size of salt is enough to overdose and kill somebody. So, the problem too with fentanyl is that the dealers are mixing it in with heroin. And when they're mixing it in, they're doing this so that they have a more desirable product for individuals because people are always looking for a better high. But when they're mixing it in, they're not thoroughly mixing it in at times, and you'll get all of a sudden what's called hot spots because there's more concentration of fentanyl within certain areas. And they can't tell how it's mixed. So you may have somebody that's packaging up bindles of heroin from one area of the heroin, and it has extreme amounts of fentanyl in it. Those are called hotspots. And those packages, when they get sent out on the streets, it's what's causing those groupings of overdose deaths or groupings of overdoses. It's because that one section of heroin was overdone with fentanyl.
Right, so like say this spot was all heroin. I know some of you can't see it, so I'll try and point it out. See that spot over there is just heroin. And then there's just a little spot of fentanyl over here, and that's all they buy. Well, chances are they're going to inject that little portion, and it's just going to be fentanyl. They're shooting straight fentanyl into their veins. And that's when we see the overdoses. And that's when we start dealing with people getting dropped off at the hospital and no one there to tell you guys what happened. It's just you get a body and tell you guys to deal with it.
Looking at our last, I want to say about 5 overdose deaths. I've looked at the toxicology reports. They've been a combination of heroin and fentanyl. So prior to that, it was mostly just heroin, acute heroin intoxication causing the overdose. Now it's a combination heroin and fentanyl. And that's been in the last 5 of them that I can recall. Yes?
Are you seeing any car fentanyl? Because some of that's coming out of
Yep.
Ohio, and it's 10,000 times more potent than fentanyl.
You bet. We're seeing carfentanil, we're seeing acetafentanil, we're seeing, they keep changing. They change the chemical composition of it because they want to try to stay ahead of the DEA Controlled Substance Acts, and it's becoming more and more potent and more dangerous.
Yeah,
So-
carfentanil, not in our area. I haven't seen it come out in the toxicology, but I have seen it in Milwaukee County.
Milwaukee, yeah.
So,
So in the movies, we see, or actually if you watch Cops.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, but it happens to us in the same. They'll sometimes taste a thing to see what it is. Doesn't that like blow your urine stream?
Oh, boy.
Or is that just
My
something that
guys-
doesn't actually happen?
That does not happen.
Okay.
That does not happen. In fact, I had one guy the other day, this is kind of a funny story, he started reaching for something without gloves on, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he looked at me and said, "Put your hand out." He put his hand out, I smacked his hand, and I said, "Don't ever do that ever again." I am, and you know, I'm a stickler on personal protective equipment. When it comes to handling drugs, cell phones that are from an overdose, it doesn't take much for us to brush up against it. And I want gloves, you know, I even went so far as purchased a hood, a ventless hood, so that when we're testing powdered substances that we're not getting it blown back at us. The safety of us is that important to me. You know, my husband is a retired law enforcement officer, and we have discussions all the time about, you know, be careful when you go out on search warrants and guns and all that stuff. My biggest concern now is that I'm not going to die from a gunshot wound, I'm going to die from an overdose. That's how law enforcement has changed, and that's why I'm very
yeah, that's why the threat of kilos of fentanyl coming across the border, it scares me, but I only have a year left at the task force, so I guess I'll be dealing with that.
Wait a minute, how many more years do you have as a law enforcement
Right.
officer? I've only got 5, so.
But to answer your question too, I have talked to informants because I was always curious, like, do you guys actually like rub this stuff on your gums? He's like, no, because they will require you, like some dealers will make you use the product to prove that you're not a cop. And that's, I usually want to know, like, is this something that happens whenever you go do a deal? Because we can't have you going in there and using heroin and then coming back out and us acting like that never happened. So what they do tell us is they use it just like we typically think they do. So if it's cocaine, they usually snort it. If it's heroin, they usually inject it, or they snort heroin as well. But the informants have told me that that part's not true. They don't rub it on their teeth or their gums, and that's just something that they see in movies.
Thanks.
This is like a really old picture of what heroin kind of was packaged in. You don't see the balloons near as much anymore. We do see some dealers, like down in Rockford, make their people that are buying from them put it in a condom, and they have a female transport that condom then back to wherever they're going so that they can avoid getting caught. We've seen that. But we have seen paper bundles like this. It's hard to kind of see the heroin in there. But we see it in bundles like that. Corner baggies, this is the top of a corner baggie, and this is your normal personal use amount, maybe even a little more. But that's the black tar heroin. We're not seeing, at least I haven't. I have not seen this.
Whitewater had some.
Just some common names. The most common one is going to be boy. So to explain that a little bit, cocaine has always been named girl historically, and heroin has always been named boy. And for bar talk, for when people come up to you, or down in Milwaukee, someone will come up to you and ask you, "You like to party?" And then some people will say, "Yeah." And they say, "Okay, boy or girl?" And they're essentially asking, "Do you like to do drugs? And do you want cocaine or heroin?" So that's just a little insight on that.
When we do talks out in the communities to parents, we tell them, take your kid's cell phone and look at the text messages that they're sending back and forth between friends. If you start seeing text messages that say, "Hey, I'm going to go hang out with the boy tonight," or "I'm going to go pick up the girl later on," start looking at the totality of all those text messages and think, okay, are they actually talking about meeting up with a friend, or are they actually talking about going to pick something up? And part of the thing with the slang terms is not only is it to determine if somebody out on the street is a user, but it's also to try to throw us dumb cops off, because us dumb cops don't know what they're talking about. Well, we figure it out. So it's kind of interesting because they keep changing the terminology, thinking that we won't pick up on it.
You want to explain these charts?
Oh, yeah. So when I first came back down to the unit in 2012, DA had sat me down and she's like, "Hey, the Dodge County, Dane County, Waukesha, and Rock have all had heroin issues and we haven't seen anything. What's going on and why don't we have these issues?" I wanted to say it's because we're a great unit, but we were just not asking the right questions. And I sat down with everybody and I said, "Hey, look, we need to start asking our street informants who are telling us what's going on about heroin. Start asking, who's using heroin? Where are they getting it from? How much? Educate yourself." Because most of the stuff we learn actually comes from the users out on the street. They will tell us whatever we want to ask, and they'll answer our questions, and they educate us. I learn a lot about use because obviously I don't use it. So they educate me on that. So we started asking the questions, and it basically went, well, I was a pill head. I used a lot of pills. It was easy for me to go around from doctor to doctor to get pills. And I'd go from emergency room to emergency room, and then to pharmacy to pick up my pills. Well, when the PDMP came about, that kind of put a halt to that, because now you guys as physicians and pharmacists and ER doctors basically started realizing that, hey, this person's going around from place to place doctor shopping. So that all of a sudden put a halt to that. And as a result of that, people who were addicted to the opioids had to find a way to keep their highs going. So they switched to heroin. And part of it was because the pills on the street were getting expensive. So a 40 milligram oxycodone, $40 on the street, and that would be one high for them. Initial dose of heroin, $20 on the street. So they were thinking, hey, this is a lot cheaper than using the pills. I can get more heroin for cheaper. Little do they know that more heroin is going to cause more expense. So I looked at this, and right around the time that the PDMP came into play is when the prescriptions went down. And I think you've got
I've
the
got
next
old
slide.
stats. No, it's not.
These
on
are,
the slide.
okay. And then I had a heroin graph, and that's where all of a sudden our heroin arrests went up. So you can see right around that time. The other thing that changed is oxycodone was reformulated, because there was a lot of issues with the oxycodone, the time release. where they could crush it up and then they could snort it and get everything right off the bat. When they reformulated that to the OP, it became more of like trying to crush it. It looked like Skittle, so it's kind of hard to snort a crushed Skittle. So that became less desirable, and it kind of pushed them more towards heroin.
So these are, I have some pictures of how heroin's typically used. This is going to be your most rare one. This is called Chasing the Dragon. They lay it out on tin foil, and they have just a powdered substance, and they have a lighter underneath, and they're inhaling the fumes of the heroin in order to get high. We see that most often with pills. I know people that smoke Percocet pills. And I don't know, again, I don't know why they do this, but they do. And it's typically going to be your prescription pills that they end up smoking. You'll find a ton of burnt tinfoil that looks disgusting, and that's your telltale sign that they're either smoking heroin or they're smoking their prescription drug. So that's what it looks like. When I said disgusting, I mean it looks super gross. You can snort it, like I said. That's starting to happen more and more. We find that most often with like heroin users that are new to the game, that are just trying heroin. They said, I'll never inject, but I'll snort it. I mean, that's the next best option. It gets them high quick, not as quick as doing it by injection, but.
The individuals that snort too, when you ask them, well, why are you snorting versus injecting? Well, I can't overdose if I snort it. Well, that's totally false. They believe that if they just snort it, that there's no chance of them overdosing. And we've had to educate a few on that.
What you see here is just your typical needle exchange kit. People can go to Madison and they get a little paper bag, and that's filled with all this stuff so they can safely inject the heroin. The idea is to avoid any contamination or diseases being spread. So they at least get their own clean needle and the cotton balls and your cooking tin and your tie-off band. But even if they have that safe needle exchange, you'll see burnt soda cans, you'll see burnt bottle caps, because they're using that often that they don't have enough time to run to Madison to go pick up a brand new needle. They'll just instead use the bottom of a soda can or spoon most commonly as well. This is a good illustration of what it looks like, the after effects of somebody that's been using heroin. If you ever see this in your home, somebody else's home, or in someone's backpack, I mean, they'll have it anywhere. It'll be a dried up spoon with these dry, dirty cotton balls, and they're using the cotton balls to filter out the particles in the heroin, so they're not just injecting like a gravelly substance into their vein. That way, at least they're getting a nice fine substance into their vein, and they can be high and not have, a rock in their bloodstream.
What a lot of them will do too is they'll save those cotton balls, and they'll have a baggie full of them at some point. They're using those at their most desperate moments. When they can't get heroin, they're going to take those cotton balls and they're going to recycle them and try to get every little bit of residue out of there so that they can at least get some high out of that.
So this has everything in it. Here's your heroin right here, your tie-off band, your spoon if you want to use it, or your cooking tin if you want to use that. The bindle that it is going to come in, you can inject it, snort it, and you can smoke it as well. So it's got every option in this picture here. Yeah, that's what they actually look like in a colored picture. But we see these all over the place when we go into these houses. It's just full of spoons and full of syringes. So yeah, this is the slide that she was talking about. So this is a before and after. Heroin seized back in, goes up to 2015 here. I don't have the newest stats. But there's just we had one big seizure. Eliminating that seizure, it's a nice solid graph all the way up.
That seizure actually occurred up here in Watertown, actually not too far from here, back in 2015. There was an individual who actually resided in Fort Atkinson. He had a life down there with a wife and kids and a nice home. He was very well known in the drug community, and we kept hearing his name over and over and over. We targeted him for since 2012, and we could never get anybody to get us into him. Everybody was too scared of him, and we finally had a break when it was, I want to say Outagamie County had called and said, hey, do you know this individual? And we said, yeah, we know him and we want to get at him pretty bad because he's been supplying a lot of heroin to the community. They actually had somebody who was getting supplied by him up there who was willing to do some controlled buys and help us take him down. That worked out great. We ended up getting a search warrant. We found out from that individual that he had a stash house up here in Watertown, just not too far from here. And we got the warrant for the house, got in there and found 26 grams of heroin in there.
That's about an ounce, just so everyone knows.
With heroin, at that point, an initial dose is anywhere from 0.01 to 0.03. So now divide that into 26 grams, and you've got a lot of heroin that was ready to go out onto the streets. So that individual, taking him down and out of here, was fantastic. He ended up getting tried in federal court for numerous overdose deaths in addition to the deliveries that they had. And he will not see the light of day. He was sentenced to, I want to say, 3 life sentences in the feds.
2 at least that I know.
At least 2. So he's gone from the community. I'm just very thankful. And that's part of what the Drug Task Force do. We work with multi-jurisdictions. It doesn't just stay in Jefferson County. We will go to Outagamie County, we'll go to Rockford, we'll go to Milwaukee. We work with everybody.
So yeah, I mean, with that, like our goal as a task force, we know we're never going to be able to totally eliminate heroin from Watertown. Like it's not going to happen. But what we can do is we can knock off people who are selling this stuff in our cities, and we can make people go migrate themselves to Milwaukee or Madison. Like that's what we want. We want them top amount of people that they're selling to, like 3 or 4. If we can keep it down to that, we're happy because we can't stop heroin, but we can definitely stop these higher level criminals that are dealing up to 26 grams at a time of heroin. That's our goal. We want to stop those people. And we have done that in the past couple of years where we've knocked off these higher level heroin dealers and forcing people to go to Milwaukee. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
We have far fewer dealers in our communities because they know that we do take a strong stance on it. But again, they're like quicksand. You get rid of one, the next one tries to take over.
So yeah, this is your typical heroin bundle. This is what it's going to come in. That's the size. So if you see like gum wrappers or what you think is a gum wrapper, or tinfoil or little balls of tinfoil, I mean, it's worth always checking. In law enforcement, it's a pain in the butt, especially in a car, because we're finding gum wrappers or aluminum foil, and we're like, oh, we got heroin. No, we don't. It's just gum wrappers. But that's usually what we see it wrapped up in. So yeah, just like it almost looks like gravel in this picture, especially. And yeah, that's your typical bendo right there. I'm going to move along because I want to leave time for questions here. I think everyone, not everyone, but I'm sure a lot of you do know long-term effects, short-term effects of heroin or prescription opioid. It's very similar. I'll get into some of the withdrawal stuff that we deal with. So when we go interview informants in the jail, they say they got picked up for a heroin overdose or something, or they had a little bit of heroin on them. By the time I go talk to them, usually they're withdrawing, and they are sweating, and they just want to get the heck out of there. And you see it. They look like they have the flu, and what they've described it as, it's like having the flu, but 10 times as bad. And you know that you have medicine waiting for you at home. You just got to get there, and your medicine's the heroin.
Our jail has been working with inmates who want to get help in getting them the Vivitrol. So they have to be clean for 7 days before we can get them on the Vivitrol through our Human Services Department. And Vivitrol basically helps keep them clean so that not only can they stay clean, but then they can start getting into the treatment and counseling, and they have to do that in order to be successful. So they're working on doing that with them as well. The Suboxone programs, they're great for those that use them the right way. However, we're finding that the heroin addicts get into the Suboxone program, they say all the right things, I want to get help, I need treatment, and can I get some Suboxone? They get their Suboxone prescriptions, they go out on the street, they go right to their dealer, get their heroin, and they keep the Suboxone in case they can't get heroin, so that they avoid going through the withdrawals.
Each strip is going for around $7 to $12, so.
And then, since they have all this Suboxone, they turn around and sell it to the next heroin dealer or heroin addict that needs something to keep them held over until their next dose. So we're buying a lot of Suboxone on the street too. So I'm a big believer in the Vivitrol because it's an injection, you can't sell that, you can't get rid of it. Suboxone we're finding issues with.
So this is kind of what we deal with. This is why you guys see people get dropped off at the hospital and nobody there to explain what the heck happened. My belief is it's how stiff these penalties are. It scares the people that maybe picked up for their buddy or they did something. They don't want to face the charges because they are pretty significant. I mean, just possession of it alone is a felony. Are they doing that much time? No, but they're also forced to get treatment, especially for possession of heroin. But intent to deliver, people know that in Jefferson County you're doing about 1 to 2 years minimum in state prison if you deliver heroin. And then, of course, the overdoses that result in death, people are looking, I mean, max of 40 years, but we saw in Dodge County somebody got 20 years in. And we also saw in Jefferson County somebody got 12 years in. So that's the kind of stuff that they're facing. That's why people are just getting dropped off. They don't want to say anything. They just want to get out of there and away.
And that 40 years is a combination of incarceration and extended supervision. So the average in Jefferson County for overdose death is 10 years incarceration, 5 to 10 years of extended supervision afterwards.
So what I took over this slide, I took over this position about 2 years ago, and this is a slide in here. I always thought it was kind of humorous because of the forfeiture and what we can do to stop heroin. These dealers that we deal with, they're not making any money. We very rarely catch a heroin dealer with anywhere close to $2,000. They're usually in the hole about $5,000 to their dealer. So we don't necessarily get a lot of forfeitures. We can take their cars too, but again, there's not much to take. I mean, so the benefit of being able to take their hard-earned money, it's not there like it is with cocaine or marijuana. Those dealers usually have a lot of assets, and that's fun stuff. This stuff, it's sad, they're poor, they don't have much, and I mean, it's just a really sad story a lot of the time with these dealers. I did a brief slide quick on methamphetamine. We're seeing a lot more of it now in the county. Like I said, it's supplanting heroin right now because the bell is swinging in the opposite direction. This is what your personal use amount is. That's what it looks like. That's probably right around 1/4 of an ounce. And it's just small crystals like that. So people are injecting methamphetamine, or they're also smoking it similar to the way that you would smoke crack cocaine.
The heroin addicts are making a shift to methamphetamine, and talking to those that have made the shift, I've asked why. Well, because chances of overdosing on methamphetamine are less likely. They still can overdose, and they can blow themselves up if they try to make it. So.
And then these are some of the physical effects. So if you're talking to somebody, these pop marks, I mean, it's just so obvious. Nobody in their 20s and 30s, well, typically nobody, has that kind of like acne or open sores. That's meth bugs. When they use meth, it feels like there's a bug inside their skin, and that's why they pick at themselves. You see pick marks on their arms and on their face. That's what they're doing. They have used, they're withdrawing, they feel like they have bugs inside of their skin and they need to get them out. So that's what we see there. And then we also see meth mouth. There wasn't a good picture to describe it. They just have very rotten teeth. Just having rotten teeth, you can't start accusing people of using meth, but it is a side effect of smoking meth.
You think of methamphetamine, and the reason why they start getting these crank bugs and scabs and stuff like that is methamphetamine is all chemical. Drano, camp fuel, it's chemicals. So they're putting that into their body, and that is the result. I had one guy that I talked to a couple weeks ago. He said he was using meth, and he was up for 8 days straight. So he keeps them just amped up, and they start tweaking and start hallucinating and things like that, and some of them become uncontrollable.
I know last week somebody in South Dakota picked their own eyes out when they're high on meth. And it's happened also in South Carolina. That was about a year ago that she did it, but that's how crazy they get. I mean, they'll pick their own eyeballs out. People on heroin, they're a lot easier to kind of deal with because they're slow and lethargic and they can't really move that well. Methamphetamine, totally different. I mean, they're totally amped up and ready to fight. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. This is the last slide. This is just, if you ever want to report anything or take down this number, take it down, and if you see something in your neighborhood, in Watertown, you'll get to me. But if you have, Fort Atkinson or anywhere in Jefferson County, they'll assign you to the right jurisdiction. This is also my contact information. Did everyone get that other number down? Sorry. Trying to hurry.
The other thing too with methamphetamine and concentrated THC, people can make these in their own homes, and the chemicals that they're using, the butane and the concentrated THC and all the other chemicals in the methamphetamine are highly volatile and very explosive. So even just turning a light switch on could blow up the entire building. So those are things that we're worried about. So when we hear about methamphetamine or we hear about BHO, the DABs, the concentrated THC, we want to make sure that we're not walking into somebody that's manufacturing it. So we're trying to stay on top of the meth, and every time we hear something about it, we jump right on it so that we don't have the same issues happening with heroin.
Yeah, I just had my first reported case of meth actually being sold in our city about 3 weeks ago. So it's finally here. It avoided Watertown for a while. Everyone that I would talk to, they said, no, I got to drive to the Dells, or I got to drive down to Fort. I have to drive somewhere else to go get it. Now it's here. So now, treat for me. But with that said, I'm done talking. If you guys have questions, we'll stand here for another 5 to 10 minutes.
Can you talk a little bit about Narcan, where people can get hold of that? I think you can buy it without a prescription, is that right?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly which pharmacies, but I think it's Walgreens and CVS have Narcan available for sale. Narcan used to be illegal to possess without a prescription, but now we don't have those issues anymore. So when we're dealing with heroin addicts or families of heroin addicts and they have Narcan, if I see it, I leave it. Because if they can use it and save somebody, that's a good thing. I understand that heroin addiction is a very difficult thing to overcome, and if you overdose once, you're probably going to overdose 2, 3, 4 times. I had one guy overdose 7 times. He's down in the jail right now. I've talked to him several times, and he's come a long way from his 5th overdose. When I saw him, he told me, he goes, I don't care. I'll keep using. I don't care if I die. That's how much I love this drug. Now we're to the point of he's starting to think clear, and he's to that point of I want help. So they have to go through a cycle, and they have to get to a point where they want help before they actually start taking those steps. The problem that we find is that when they get to that point of wanting help, sometimes the facilities don't have room for them, or the treatment doesn't have room in their programs to get them in. But so Narcan, yeah, it is available out there. A lot of overdoses I go on, it's there. It's just that nobody was there at the time that the overdose happened to use it. We carry Narcan.
Yeah, about 3 years ago, we teamed up with the hospital, and Dr. Foster gave us, still gives us all of our Narcan that we carry in our squads. And initially, we only had four uses the first year. Next year, we had about 10. This year, we had about 40. Oh, well, 2017, we had about 40 uses total combined with the fire department. But I mean, it's gone way up, and it is saving a lot of people. But
I carry Narcan all the time. I have it in my car right now, and I carry it on deals because we don't know on a deal if an informant's going to walk into a house and somebody's overdosing. Then the deal's off. We go in, we save life. We keep it down by our evidence testing stations. 2 officers are always testing powder together. One testing, one to be the safety officer in case something happens to that officer. We've got Narcan right there for them. I find that sometimes I even carry it in my personal life. Just if it's with me, I carry it because you don't know if you're going to walk into a gas station bathroom and somebody's overdosing. it's important to have
To what
available.
extent are you seeing utilization in schools, like middle school and high school and stuff?
So we have a lot of marijuana use, and what our liaison officer at the high school has been doing is he investigates that stuff kind of on his own, because they're not higher level dealers that, you know, enough for the task force to go after. But he definitely, if he gets any reports, he calls a canine up, he'll sniff their locker, he sniffs their vehicle, and it's more of like a lesson learned kind of thing. He gets them, you know, written up in a juvenile referral, but it's, so far it's been a lot of marijuana. Around 16 to 18 is when we see people switching over, getting into some of the cocaine. We had that last year. We had some 16, 17-year-olds getting into cocaine, and that becomes my territory then. And then heroin use. I had an overdose that happened to a 16-year-old. He was just trying to use some prescription narcotics, and overdosed because he didn't know what methadone was and didn't know that he's not going to get super high. It's just a really long dose. So I've seen that, not as often. Marijuana is the number one though. We're seeing a lot more dealers from freshmen on of marijuana. Middle school, not so much. You know, we'll get reports of it, and that's usually taken care of right away.
In Jefferson County, the predominant age group that's using heroin is between 18 and 29. That is the majority, although we've had some in the 60s that are using. So what we did is we put together a program to get into the schools, because the last time any of these students have had any kind of drug education was in 5th grade through the DARE programs. So we decided that we needed to hit these kids before they got out into adulthood, before they go out to college and start seeing this and get exposed to it. So we go into the high schools with the Stairway to Heroin, Playground to Pills, some of our own programs, and we do all school presentations to them and explain the dangers of drug use, and particularly heroin. In addition to that, what we wanted to do is open up the lines of communication between the students and their parents. So then we also have a program for the parents, either the night before, the night of, or the night after, talking to the parents about what we discussed with the kids. And we put on a program for them about what to look for, how to deal with it. And we tell the parents, go back and talk to your student and open those lines of communication, because if a parent and a student can talk, you may be able to have them understand the dangers. So we're hoping that, if we can at least change one kid's mind somewhere down the road where they're exposed to it and then they realize, hey, this is bad stuff, then we've been successful. But there's no way of really measuring it, because we don't ever hear that afterwards.
Good.
So we are seeing increasing number of pregnant patients with this issue as well. And obviously, we are dealing from where we practice. Don't have much of control things at the other end. And that's the reason we see lack of compliance, lack of stations coming from clinical phase here. And then the problem, not only the candy part of care, but then the problem happens after the delivery. It's a whole different issue.
With the withdrawal from the infant?
Not only that, but then how to take care of patients themselves as well. So not only infant. So what is in your experience, how is that pregnant patient population that you've seen over the last few years, and what is the experience of yours?
Usually what we see is the family will actually report, if their daughter's been using heroin and they're pregnant, or their wife is using heroin and they're pregnant, they'll report it to law enforcement most of the time. And what we do at that point, it's a Chapter 51, where they're dependent on drugs and they're affecting the life of another child. And that's how we get involved. That's about as much teeth as we can get. I know that down in the jail, if someone's pregnant, but they're going through withdrawals, they'll have them on methadone, but limited doses to avoid having the child become dependent on it.
Well, if they're pregnant, I know the jail staff, we have nursing nurses down there, and they have some protocols. I'm not exactly sure what prescriptions they're giving to them or how they're dealing with them, but we do have nurses in the jail that deal with them. We also have human services and counselors in the jail that deal with individuals that are addicted. If it's reported to us that an individual's pregnant and they're using, we also get human services involved so that we can get a child in need of protective services started, and human services deals with that aspect. So if it's not really criminal, we don't get really deep involved, but we try to get the right people involved, human services, our jail staff, and things like that. So.
Does that answer your questions? Sir? Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Kind
so
of.
I think that's the problem is that prevents human services involvement.
Yeah, human services involvement that's our chapter 51.
Yes, but
Yes.
that's great, but then the fear of having that.
Yeah, it's a lesser chance of reporting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a big barrier for them to come to prenatal care as well. So it's a catch-22 situation. You want to help them, but that also is a barrier for them to be connected to the healthcare as well.
Yeah, and that's why we always rely on family members. I mean, we can't force people to, get their treat. Well, we can, but we can't force them to come in and be
So
seen.
it's a multidisciplinary factor, and that's we need to find a balance where we can balance out these things.
Where you won't get in trouble, but
Yeah.
we do want to take care of your baby too. Right.
And I know it's gonna be hard for you as medical professionals because you have that confidentiality as well. For us, the people that we come in contact with, the mother that's pregnant, it's usually because of the good upbringing that they have, their family members that are concerned, and they know the importance of getting the help for that individual. So those are the ones that come to us. The families that are broken families, that the parents aren't involved with their daughter who's pregnant, those are the ones that are hard to really help, because you have to have that support system around you in order to keep you going. And that's what I tell a lot of families, they get so frustrated because they're trying to help their children and they're trying to get them the help that they need. But I tell them, I said, they have to want that help. And there's going to come a point in their life where all of a sudden they're going to hit rock bottom, and please be there and ready to help them and give them whatever they need to succeed and get them to the treatment. So you got to be there all the way, and just being a heroin addict or an addict in general, you have those ups and downs. But people forget too that the family have those same ups and downs because they're dealing with the same things. They're dealing with that heartbreak, the anticipation of, oh, they're going to get help, and then all of a sudden, oh no, they fell off the wagon, they're not clean anymore. And they go through the same ups and downs. But it's important for those families to stay with that person all the way through. And those are the ones that we see because they care and they come to us and say, hey, help us get some help for our child.
So there was one more question there, wasn't there? Or did we answer it?
We've been.
Is there any retail clinics by us? I mean, when I looked it up, it's like Milwaukee, Oconomowoc, and Madison. Is there anything locally for us?
I know that Jefferson County Human Services was getting Vivitrol with their human services, so as long as you have insurance, you go down to Jefferson County. There might be an option, but there's also sometimes a waiting list. So that's the other problem we run into is these people want help and they go down and they're on a waiting list. But I know that Jefferson County just started doing it. Dodge County's been doing it for at least 2 years now. So if you go up to Dodge County Human Services, you have insurance, and you want to get the Vivitrol shot, they can set you up as long as you talk to the counselor, you go to the classes.
So I don't think any of our clinics are doing it unless there's somebody who's out there doing it.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what clinic it is. I just direct them to Human Services because I know Dodge County has it, and now Jefferson County does. So
I know it's a very expensive shot. I want to say it was like, no, I can't even remember, but I know it's extremely expensive. And a lot more of the insurance companies are now going to it, seeing how much it's helping. So.
Well, on that note, we better wrap up. I really appreciate being here.
if anyone has questions, just feel free to come up here. I don't want to take anyone away from their job.